A man walks into a room filled with power and prestige, but instead of being welcomed, he is met with cold stares, whispered judgments, and invisible barriers that no one dares to name aloud. He wears no flashy clothes, carries no status symbols, yet his presence disrupts the carefully crafted order of a world that measures worth by surface appearances. What follows is a relentless series of humiliations and subtle acts of exclusion, pushing him to the edge of silence. But beneath it all lies a secret that will shake this empire to its core and turn the tables in a way no one sees coming. This is the story of resilience, prejudice, and a revelation that changes everything. If you're ready to uncover the truth behind the facade, like this video, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts below. Tell me where you're watching from and what you think happens next. Your voice shapes this story. The revolving glass doors of Whiteststone Capital's Manhattan headquarters spun slowly as the Monday morning rush surged forward, each rotation spitting another perfectly polished executive into the vast marble foyer. Every inch of the building's interior was designed to intimidate, from the 20-foot ceilings to the towering steel abstract sculpture that no one really liked, but everyone pretended to admire. Voices buzzed low like the hum of an engine. Leather shoes clicked rhythmically across the floor, echoing upward like a symphony of wealth. Laughter was controlled, quiet, always tied to business. It was a cathedral of capitalism. Then the rhythm faltered, not by much, just a momentary hitch in the social machine as a new presence entered the space. Lennox Cade stepped inside with a gait too unhurried for the hour. He didn't fit the mold of the high-frequency finance types scurrying toward elevators and executive lounges. His shirt was linen, light gray and collar spread. Pressed, yes, but absent the tailored stiffness everyone else wore like armor. His pants were dark and clean, but clearly worn, with creases that hinted at age, not fashion. His shoes were leather, black and polished, yet gently dulled at the heels, like they had walked through 100 meetings where his voice was always the last to be heard. A faded scar traced his left wrist, just below the cuff, long and pale, visible enough to suggest a story, but distant enough to have been forgotten. He wore no designer labels, no engraved watch, no silver cufflinks. He held no phone to his ear, no latte in hand, no briefcase with embossed initials. Just himself. And yet, for those few seconds, all eyes flicked toward him. Lennox approached the main reception desk without hesitation. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 20s, her platinum blonde hair twisted into a severe knot, her posture perfect, her eyes locked on her monitor. She didn't look up. Her manicured fingers danced across the keyboard as if the man in front of her didn't exist. After several seconds of standing in silence, Lennox politely cleared his throat. She finally lifted her gaze, slow and impassive, and studied him with the kind of glance someone might give a misplaced package. Unexpected, inconvenient, and probably not their problem. Without a greeting, she asked for his name, Lennox Cade. He spoke it evenly, without inflection. She typed it, her lips pressing into a thin line. Behind Lennox, a man in a dark gray pinstripe suit, Bluetooth in his ear, expensive coat folded over his arm, stepped forward. The receptionist's entire posture changed. She smiled, addressed him by name, and handed him a guest badge as if he were royalty arriving at a palace. Lennox remained invisible. When she returned her attention to him, her tone was flat. "I don't see a Cade listed for today's meetings," she said, not accusing, just stating. Lennox calmly explained he had a scheduled meeting with Whiteststone's investment team, cleared by someone named Claire in scheduling. She frowned, said Claire didn't work in this department, and began clicking again. A security guard appeared, not alarmed, just hovering. Another staffer approached the desk and gave Lennox a quick up and down, then whispered something to the receptionist. Lennox didn't catch it. He didn't need to. He knew the code, knew the body language. He had lived it 1,000 times in different cities, different lobbies, different forms. Eventually, she found his name buried at the bottom of a list, marked Visitor TBD. She printed him a temporary badge, handed it over without apology, and motioned toward the general waiting area by the windows. Not the investor lounge, not the executive suite, Just a sterile row of molded plastic chairs and a muted view of the street below. Lennox sat down without comment. He didn't fidget, didn't scroll through his phone. He simply waited. People moved past him in a steady stream, most ignoring him, a few glancing with curiosity. One or two with something colder. A hospitality staff member passed by with a tray of croissants and espresso shots. He offered one to each person in the row, except Lennox. Their eyes didn't meet. The omission wasn't accidental. It never was. After nearly 20 minutes, Lennox rose again and returned to the desk. A different woman had taken over. He repeated his purpose. She looked confused, then surprised. Apparently, the meeting location had been changed to the upper executive floor. They had failed to notify him. She printed a new badge and buzzed him through the security gate. The escort assigned to him didn't speak, just walked at a clipped pace toward the elevators and held the door open with robotic indifference. Inside, Lennox stood silently as two men entered behind him, mid-conversation. One glanced at Lennox's reflection in the mirrored elevator panel and snorted quietly. "Guest maintenance rides with us now," he murmured to his colleague, making no attempt to lower his voice. The other man chuckled. Neither of them looked directly at Lennox. The elevator dinged. They stepped off. Lennox followed unnoticed. The floor they arrived on was hushed, reserved for meetings that didn't appear on public calendars. Glass walls, oak paneling, oil paintings of dead men who'd made money off war and steel. A receptionist checked her screen and pointed Lennox toward a conference room down the hall. He nodded and made his way there alone. Inside, the long table gleamed under recessed lighting. Not a soul had arrived. No water had been poured. Names were dropped like coins into a fountain: Henderson, Griggs, Meridian, while references to wine auctions and ski chalets slid easily into idle conversation. None of it was directed at Lennox. His chair remained separate from the circle, slightly distanced by the way others had unconsciously arranged themselves, forming a quiet ring that did not include him. He could feel the absence like a weight pressing into his shoulders, but he didn't shift. His face remained calm, unreadable, as if this erasure was not new. It wasn't. At exactly 10 o'clock, a senior associate named Brian Halter entered the room, clutching a silver tablet and flashing a sharp grin. Everyone straightened. The meeting was beginning. Brian launched into a presentation on projected funding ratios and Q4 burn analysis, gesturing at the screen where animated graphs danced over stock tickers. Names of firms appeared. So did acronyms. But not Lennox's, not his fund, not a single reference to the entity he represented. The implication was clear. Whoever Lennox was, he wasn't expected to contribute. He was barely acknowledged as present. After the first 15 minutes, Brian gestured toward the room and invited comments, eyes skimming across the row of faces, but skipping over Lennox entirely, as if his seat were empty. Others spoke confidently. They nodded at each other's points. They leaned forward to emphasize agreement. When Lennox finally did clear his throat and sit up straighter, preparing to speak, Brian looked toward the far end of the room, as if someone else had spoken instead. One of the junior partners coughed to fill the space, then launched into a tangent about portfolio synergy. The topic shifted, and Lennox remained silent. No one noticed, or they pretended not to. When the meeting adjourned for a mid-morning break, the staff pushed in a wheeled cart loaded with refreshments: sparkling water, espresso, almond croissants, fruit parfaits, a tray of green smoothies for the health-conscious. The smell of coffee drifted through the room like an invitation. A young attendant began placing cups and plates in front of each chair, smiling stiffly as he moved down the row. But when he reached Lennox, he paused, looked down, then moved on without placing anything. He didn't even make eye contact. Lennox glanced down at the spotless portion of the table in front of him. No cup, no napkin, no plate, and let out the barest exhale. A pair of analysts laughed quietly 2 seats down. He knew what they were laughing at. Not the absence of food, the assumption. He was not one of them, not someone deserving of polite hospitality. To them, he was either a mistake or a curiosity. Either way, he wasn't their equal. As the group stepped into the hallway to stretch and continue their discussions, Lennox lingered behind. No one invited him to join the clusters, now forming near the glass railing that overlooked the atrium below. They were already dividing into familiar alliances, pockets of shared history and golf trips. He stood at the far window, facing the city, arms crossed lightly. Behind him, a man said under his breath, "Someone from facilities must have sat in on the wrong room." The group chuckled. The words weren't meant to be heard, but they were spoken loud enough to make sure they were. Lennox didn't turn around. He didn't give them the satisfaction. His gaze remained on the skyline, watching the clouds shift over the buildings like silent tides. Minutes later, a member of the firm's operations team appeared and approached the circle nearest the executive lounge. She wore a sleek blazer and carried a black tablet under her arm. Her eyes swept the crowd, then settled briefly on Lennox. She walked over, not toward him, but behind him, and asked two men if they had seen the gentleman from Cade Holdings. They shook their heads without hesitation. One shrugged. She checked her tablet again, frowning. Lennox turned slowly, just enough to be seen. Her eyes met his. There was a flash of confusion, then recognition. Her smile faltered. She checked his badge and hesitated. Then she turned and walked back to her station. She didn't approach him again. The message was quiet but sharp. His presence was noted, but still not fully welcomed. Acknowledged, but without warmth. Validated, but never embraced. Back in the conference room, the seating had shifted. Someone had placed a blue folder on Lennox's chair, as if marking territory. The implication was clear. His seat had been reclaimed. He didn't make a fuss. He walked to the last open seat at the far end, one placed awkwardly near the refreshment cart where servers occasionally bumped past him. The new position had a blocked view of the monitor, and he had to strain slightly to hear the conversation. No one offered to switch seats. No one mentioned the change. When another presentation began, Lennox leaned forward, quietly making notes in a slim, leather-bound notepad. He was the only one writing by hand. Everyone else tapped on tablets or laptops. One junior analyst stared at him, then smirked, nudging the person beside him. The smirk spread. A whispered joke passed between them, and Lennox heard the word analog. Another called him off-grid. It wasn't funny, not really, but it made them feel superior. That was the point. Later, when everyone was called downstairs for a working lunch with select partners, Lennox's name wasn't on the elevator list. A woman at the guest check-in counter checked twice, then called someone quietly. The others boarded the elevator without him. He stood there, silent, surrounded by laughter and the sound of leather shoes sliding across tile. His temporary seat, awkwardly wedged near the AV cart, remained unclaimed by anyone else. No one made eye contact as they filed in. No one offered acknowledgement beyond curt nods to each other. The seating arrangement had become a map of unspoken status, and Lennox remained squarely off the grid. The next presentation was led by someone from branding, a polished man in a pale blue shirt who paced with a kind of theatrical charm, tossing phrases like market visibility, narrative alignment, and strategic intimacy into the room like confetti. Laughter followed his witticisms, applause after each sleek transition slide. His attention never wandered in Lennox's direction. The room responded in kind. As the presentation dragged on, attention started to fray. People glanced at their phones beneath the table, whispered back and forth under the hum of the projector fan. Lennox took a sip from his own water bottle, the same one he had brought in with him that morning, its contents now tepid and flat. From the corner of his vision, he noticed two analysts near the window exchange a look. One of them, a young man with a shaved jawline and expensive cufflinks, leaned toward the other and whispered something while glancing at Lennox. The second man smirked, covered his mouth, and stifled a laugh. A third person, seated just behind them, pulled out his phone and tapped something into a messaging app. Seconds later, a tiny chime echoed around the table. A ripple of low chuckles passed between seats. Someone cleared their throat in exaggerated mimicry. Lennox didn't react. He kept his gaze on the presentation, but he felt it. The shift. The undercurrent of derision. They weren't just ignoring him now. They were toying with him. A few minutes later, a new image appeared on the projector screen. It was part of a visual campaign draft, photos of successful clients, clean modern designs, captions like integrity, precision, results. But among the rotating images, a photo suddenly flashed that didn't belong. It was a grainy, clearly zoomed-in shot of Lennox from earlier that morning, sitting alone in the staff cafeteria. The lighting was unflattering. His head was tilted slightly as he read from his notepad, his expression relaxed, unaware. In the image, someone had digitally added a speech bubble. Did anyone order the intern? The room erupted into sudden laughter. Someone clapped. A few even whistled. The presenter blinked, startled, and fumbled to click past the slide. "Sorry, that's not supposed to be. Let's move on," he muttered. But it was too late. The laughter had already taken root. Several attendees turned toward Lennox now, not with concern, but with open amusement, as if finally acknowledging his presence, but only as the punchline to a private joke. Lennox didn't move. He didn't ask who had done it. He didn't demand an apology. He simply sat straighter, placing both hands flat on the table. His fingers were still, his breathing slow. His eyes flicked toward the presenter, then toward the room, but he said nothing. The silence stretched. No one spoke to defend him. No one asked the obvious question, who put that slide in the deck? Instead, they returned to business with awkward transitions and forced chuckles, as if nothing had happened. The image of Lennox, frozen in grainy embarrassment, lingered in everyone's mind like the echo of a cheap laugh at a stranger's expense. Later, during a breakout session, attendees split into small teams. Assignments were handed out casually, with each group given a space somewhere in the building to work on impact proposals. Lennox was not assigned. No group included him. When he approached the organizer, a harried man with a clipboard, the man squinted at the list and said, "Oh, must have been a copy error. Hang tight, we'll find you something." 30 minutes passed. The teams dispersed. No one came for him. Lennox wandered the hallway alone, past offices and glass-walled conference pods filled with conversation and whiteboard sketches. Eventually, he found a quiet alcove with a high window overlooking the courtyard. He sat there with his notebook, flipping through the pages he had filled so far, clean, meticulous handwriting, each line containing months of insight and planning, each number carefully vetted, each conclusion the result of data his fund had paid dearly to acquire. But none of that mattered now. Not in this building. Not to these people. When he returned to the main room after the breakout sessions ended, the atmosphere had changed. His chair was missing. Literally gone. Not moved, gone. In its place stood a tall stool, the kind used for presentations or break room bars. Too high for the table. No armrests. No back. Lennox stood there for a moment, then lowered himself onto the stool, knees awkwardly bent, hands on his lap. The room seemed to tilt around him, the imbalance deliberate, even theatrical. No one offered to find him a replacement. No one even looked at him anymore. It was as if by mocking him, they had confirmed his place, unspoken, unacknowledged, but clear. He had become part of the background noise, something to snicker at between slides, a living accessory to their afternoon entertainment. If anything, the silence had grown colder overnight. The incident with the photo, the printout, the forced laughter, none of it had been addressed. No apology, no confrontation, only a deeper layer of absence. As if Lennox had not simply been mocked, but also cataloged and dismissed. He made his way to the conference level, where most of the day's sessions would continue. The room numbers had changed on the digital schedule boards. His assigned meeting room was now labeled Reserved Internal Review only. His name was not listed. He checked twice, then approached the event coordinator who was taping new floor layouts to a bulletin board. She barely paused to look at him before offering a vague explanation. Sessions had been reshuffled, some attendees reassigned. She didn't have the updated list, but someone would follow up. He stood for a moment, processing the flatness in her tone, then gave a single nod and stepped aside. He wandered the hallway with the slow deliberation of someone who no longer expected direction. Inside the nearby breakout rooms, groups were already gathering, voices low and purposeful, laptops open, styluses scratching over glass surfaces. In one room, a partner was drawing on a whiteboard, gesturing with animated clarity. In another, laughter drifted through the glass walls, familiar and unbothered. Lennox was not in any of those rooms. No one called for him. No one asked if he was missing. After nearly an hour, he found an open door leading to a small private lounge space. Low chairs, soft lighting, a fridge stocked with mineral water. He stepped inside, settled into the corner seat, and pulled out his notebook. It had become a habit, now a kind of ritual, not just for work, but for grounding. As he wrote, his handwriting as deliberate as his breath, the room remained empty. No one joined him. No one even glanced inside. They didn't need to. They had already uninvited him without saying a word. Later that day, a networking event was scheduled in the South Wing, a mid-tier mixer between external firms and internal executives. Lennox's badge had originally listed the session as mandatory. But as he approached the glass double doors, 2 interns stationed outside stopped him, asked for his clearance, then radioed someone when they didn't recognize his badge color. After several minutes of hush chatter, he was told that his access level was in conflict and advised to check in with coordination. He said nothing, nodded once, and turned away. Behind him, a group of younger associates passed through without delay. One of them laughed and said something about decoding the hierarchy. Another replied, "It's self-explanatory, just follow the suits." They brushed past Lennox, as if he were part of the wall. He found a small lounge across the corridor, not officially reserved, and sat near the back wall facing a vertical garden. The greenery stretched upward, lush and breathing, a small patch of stillness in a building that seemed engineered to push him outward. Every plant was arranged in perfect symmetry. Every breath of air carried the scent of curated design. He let the silence settle over him. The low hum of activity beyond the glass served as background noise, a reminder that business was proceeding, with or without him. No one came to fetch him. No one asked why he hadn't attended the event. His absence didn't register, not even as an oversight. When he returned to the main conference room in the afternoon, his badge failed to scan. The panel blinked red 3 times, then displayed restricted access. A staff member asked for his name, then typed into a tablet. She paused, her expression tightening, then said she would need to confirm his credentials. Lennox waited off to the side. Nearby, 2 executives watched him with vague disinterest, the way one might study a piece of furniture that no longer fits the office decor. After several minutes, the staffer returned with a colleague who asked Lennox to step aside for a private clarification. He was taken to a small side office, windowless, sparse, sterile, and asked a series of questions about his presence, his role, his reason for attending. He answered calmly, giving names, emails, references. The staffers exchanged glances. One left the room to make a call. When he returned, he simply handed Lennox a printed schedule and said, "You've been reassigned to general observation for the remainder of the program." There was no explanation, no apology, just a new badge, a different color, lower clearance, fewer permissions. From that point forward, Lennox was a shadow moving through halls designed to forget him. At lunch, his name was not on any reservation. He ate alone near a window, again handed a bagged meal while others were ushered into catered lounges with linen-draped tables and soft music. His chair was the one closest to the trash bin. His utensils were plastic, his napkin recycled paper. When he passed the hallway screen displaying corporate highlights, he saw photos from the morning mixer, smiling faces, clusters of networking suits, captions celebrating collaboration. He wasn't in a single frame, not the background, not the edges, not even in reflection. His entire presence had been erased from the visual record. At a group photo shoot later that afternoon, everyone was summoned to the atrium. He was not, but he arrived anyway, following the flow of movement, finding a spot near the back. The photographer raised the camera, called out names, pointed people forward. An assistant glanced at Lennox and gestured for him to move out of frame. "We're at capacity," she said flatly. He stepped aside. No one objected. No one spoke on his behalf. The camera shutter clicked, capturing a version of reality where he didn't exist. He arrived at the morning debrief wearing the same calm expression, his linen shirt neatly pressed, his shoes polished despite the wear. But when he entered the conference wing, his access badge failed again. This time, the security panel did not blink red. It simply buzzed once, then went black. The guard stationed nearby did not offer assistance. Instead, he stepped slightly in front of the door, as if Lennox's continued presence might constitute a security breach. Only after Lennox requested assistance did the man call someone, and even then, he spoke with the tone reserved for troublemakers rather than professionals. A junior coordinator arrived, flustered and apologetic, but unable to hide the note of confusion in her voice. According to her records, Lennox had been relocated to non-client sessions, pending further administrative review. She couldn't say who had made the change or when. She handed him a revised schedule, thinner than before, with fewer rooms, fewer time slots, fewer opportunities. When Lennox reached his newly assigned meeting space, a windowless seminar room tucked into the building's west annex, he discovered the door already open, the seats mostly empty. Inside were a handful of unfamiliar faces, contractors, minor partners, temp consultants. The overhead lights were too bright, the air stale. There was no formal speaker. A printed handout was being passed around. No screens, no refreshments, no staff on standby. The content was generic, the kind recycled for filler rather than function. As he took a seat, the man beside him shifted slightly away, barely perceptible, but enough to make the gesture land. The facilitator, a middle manager with a nasal voice, began a rote explanation of procedural compliance and vendor alignment, reading straight from the handout. No questions were encouraged. No introductions offered. Lennox took notes anyway, his handwriting precise, even as he realized the information was years outdated. The message was not subtle. This was a holding pen, not a meeting. An area to place those who had outlived their usefulness or never had it to begin with. By midday, Lennox's name had disappeared from the digital directory outside the elevator banks. Where his photo once sat in the rotating guest slide deck, there was now only a blank placeholder. Even the font used to list attendee credentials seemed lighter for him, as if slowly fading into transparency. In the communal cafe, a new policy had been posted. Lounge seating was reserved for confirmed vendors and approved partner firms. When Lennox sat at one of the smaller tables near the rear, a staff member approached and asked to see his clearance. She did not recognize his badge and politely but firmly suggested he relocate to the outer hallway, where plastic chairs lined the corridor like a waiting room. He complied without protest. As he stood, the room fell quiet, not from hostility, but something worse. The comfortable silence of people who felt justified in letting him go. During the afternoon sessions, seating charts were enforced for the first time. In the primary conference room, rows of chairs bore name tags printed on thick cardstock. Lennox's name was absent. When he inquired at the reception table, the coordinator blinked, checked her list, and said, "You must be overflow." He was directed to an adjacent room with a live video feed, a space used for late arrivals and administrative observers. The lighting was poor, the sound delayed. The other attendees in the room sat slouched or disinterested, some scrolling their phones, others half asleep. When Lennox asked if there would be a Q&A interface, the tech operator shrugged and said it was view only. As the session progressed, a speaker in the main room began referencing case studies, some of which included data Lennox himself had compiled and submitted months prior through preliminary proposals. He recognized the structure, the metrics, even the phrasing, but no credit was given, no mention of his fund, no nod to the origin. He watched, expression steady, as others nodded in agreement at conclusions built on work that now belonged to the building, not to the man sitting just beyond its threshold. Afterward, as people filed out, Lennox waited near the hallway's end to rejoin the crowd. A partner passed by, glanced at him, then handed him an empty coffee cup, mistaking him for staff. Without a word, Lennox took the cup, placed it in a trash bin, and stepped aside. The partner didn't thank him, didn't look back, just kept walking, engaged in a call that likely held more weight than the moment. Later that day, Lennox checked his email at a guest terminal. His calendar had been reduced to 3 remaining sessions. 2 were listed as optional. 1 had been marked postponed indefinitely. No explanations, no direct communication. He scrolled through the event's internal forum, where team photos and networking highlights filled the feed. He was not in any of them. Even the original photos from the first day, where he had been visible in the background, had been cropped, reframed, or replaced. He clicked on one image, a wide shot of the lobby where he had once stood near the sculpture. In the new version, that section had been blurred. Just an aesthetic filter, they would say. Just a stylistic choice. But he knew. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the same way a man knows when his name is being erased from a ledger while others smile and shake hands above him. By evening, he returned to the hotel assigned for visiting professionals. His key card failed at the elevator. At the front desk, the clerk informed him that his room had been changed, moved to a different wing due to restructuring of group reservations. The new room was smaller, farther from the conference center, with a view of the delivery dock instead of the city skyline. His previous room had been reassigned to a mid-tier director from one of the newer firms. Lennox said nothing. He accepted the new key, thanked the clerk, and walked down the hall. The carpet was thinner here, the hallway darker, the silence less dignified. As Lennox stepped into the executive mezzanine that morning, shoulders squared, shirt as crisp as ever despite the fatigue beginning to tug at his eyes, he was greeted not by a staffer, but by a laminated sign taped crudely across the entry badge scanner. Authorized access, only NO deliveries. He paused in front of it for a moment, registering the text, his badge still clipped plainly in view. 2 interns standing nearby stifled laughter and looked away when he turned toward them, pretending to be engrossed in their phones. His badge was still valid, barely, but the message was the point. It didn't matter what was printed in the system. He was not welcome. Not really. Once inside, the usual flurry of morning activity surrounded him. Catered breakfast stations, coffee carts, small pods of conversation filled with murmurs of valuation spikes, term sheets, merger whispers. But as he moved through the space, the flow bent around him. Conversation slowed, heads tilted in quiet disapproval, shoulders turned deliberately. He approached a coffee cart like everyone else, waited in line, and when he reached the front, the barista glanced at his badge, then over his shoulder. Services paused. Please step aside. The cart continued serving the next executive without pause. Lennox said nothing. He stepped away. Behind him, someone muttered just loud enough to carry, "At least dress like you belong." A ripple of snickers followed. During the morning session, a large round table hosted in the Skyline suite, Lennox found his designated seat replaced with a folding chair. Not just different in style, but conspicuously out of place, the kind used for overflow at weddings or backstage crews. Its legs were uneven. It creaked when he sat. The others around the table had plush leather conference seats embroidered with the firm's insignia. A few of them leaned in to whisper about the chair. One lifted his phone and snapped a photo, not even attempting subtlety. Moments later, Lennox heard a ping echo across the room as someone chuckled at the image now circulating in the group chat, captioned with VIP seating upgrade. He didn't ask to move. He didn't make a scene. He sat on the creaking frame, opened his notebook, and began taking notes like he always did, though now even that had become a trigger. The analyst seated 2 chairs down leaned sideways to his neighbor and said, "Is that a journal?" The laughter wasn't even hidden now. As the discussion turned to fund allocations and capital flow projections, one of the junior executives stood up to present a case study. The monitor lit up with a portfolio analysis that Lennox recognized instantly: charts, language, risk distribution curves, his own, taken directly from a report Cade Holdings had submitted months earlier. The presenter credited independent research from merged data sources, but Lennox knew the specific phrasing, the color coding, even the typos. It was his work, stripped of his name, and still no one turned to him. No one asked for input. No one offered a nod of acknowledgement. When the applause came, it was for the man at the podium. Lennox sat in silence on his unstable chair, staring at the screen, a hollow burn settling behind his ribs. Lunch was scheduled as a formal networking banquet, hosted on the 12th floor terrace. Name cards marked each place at long white clove tables. Lennox's card was missing. He searched for it discreetly, but found nothing. A catering staff member intercepted him near the serving line and politely asked for his name. Upon hearing it, she double-checked a list, then handed him a small brown paper bag and motioned toward a utility stairwell. "You've been assigned to Lounge C for dietary preference service," she said. Lounge C was an auxiliary break room 2 floors down, normally used by technical staff and vendors. Lennox took the bag without comment, stepped away from the terrace, and walked the narrow stairs to the lower level. The lounge was nearly empty. One flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead. He sat alone at a metal table, opened the bag, and found a wilted sandwich, a bruised apple, and a bottle of tap water with no label. From above, the faint echo of clinking glasses and applause drifted down through the stairwell. He took a bite in silence. Later that afternoon, an interactive leadership panel was convened, inviting questions from the audience. Attendees were asked to submit prompts via tablet. Lennox keyed in a well-formed, data-backed question challenging the presented growth forecast. When it was time to read submissions aloud, his was skipped. Another was chosen instead, shorter, less informed, but delivered with the casual bravado of someone confident his voice mattered. Lennox's screen pinged with a quiet notification. Submission does not meet current relevance criteria. Yet 5 minutes later, the moderator unknowingly repeated Lennox's question, read from a different submission that had reworded it. The crowd nodded at the new phrasing. The speaker smiled and answered it in full. Lennox stared at the screen, lips pressed tightly, his fingers folding the corner of his notebook page until it tore. Toward the end of the day, someone passed behind him and dropped a folded piece of paper on his table. He looked down. It was a printed meme, his face photoshopped onto the body of a man pushing a mail cart. Above the image, "Welcome our newest facilities manager." No one signed it. No one needed to. Laughter rose in pockets throughout the room, timed suspiciously well with the paper's circulation. He held the image for a long moment, then folded it in half, then again, until it disappeared in his palm. He didn't tear it. He didn't crumple it. He simply slid it into his notebook and closed the cover. It started during a mid-morning strategy session where Lennox found himself sitting on the periphery of a closed-door meeting with a handful of mid-level associates and consultants. The topic was a new investment model in emerging markets, a project Lennox had followed closely for months. As the group debated projections and risk thresholds, Lennox quietly pointed out an inconsistency in the data, referencing a specific fund code that none of the others recognized. His voice was low but confident, and the room fell silent for a moment. One of the analysts, a woman known for her sharp tongue and quick wit, glanced at him with a flicker of surprise, whispering to her neighbor, "Where did he learn that?" The answer was obvious to Lennox, but his interjection caused a ripple effect. Others in the room shifted their gaze toward him with new curiosity, some exchanging furtive glances. That moment planted a seed of doubt among them. A question that had been simmering quietly in the background now began to surface. Who was Lennox Cade, really? Later that afternoon, while passing through the executive hall, Lennox overheard a conversation that tightened the tension further. A senior executive was on the phone in German, discussing investment opportunities in Frankfurt. His accent was thick, his tone measured but sharp. Lennox slowed his pace and, without interrupting, corrected the pronunciation of a key financial term mid-sentence. The executive froze, his expression flickering between surprise and irritation. The room seemed to hold its breath. A small group nearby exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't the first time Lennox had demonstrated an inside knowledge far beyond what his assumed role suggested. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Whispers in the hallways, questions in the elevator, furtive glances over coffee cups. The once invisible man was becoming visible, not because he sought attention, but because his expertise could no longer be ignored. That evening, the usual digital bulletin board that displayed attendee photos and credentials was updated. Lennox's image remained the same modest portrait from the first day, but now a new tag appeared beneath it: Senior Advisor, Cade Equity Holdings. It was a small change, easily overlooked by many, but the firm's internal network tracked everything. Lennox's profile began to appear on investment documents, in email threads, and on session attendee lists with increased frequency. No longer was he just a peripheral figure. His name carried weight. Some employees who had once laughed at his absence now paused, their amusement replaced with a quiet caution. The hierarchy that had pushed him aside was being subtly challenged. The next morning, Lennox was invited, not formally, but through a discreet note slipped under his hotel room door, to attend an informal breakfast meeting with a select group of senior advisors. The venue was a private lounge reserved for high-level discussions, off-limits to most. When he arrived, the room was intimate, the air thick with the scent of rich coffee and polished wood. The attendees included a handful of influential figures from the finance world, some familiar faces, others enigmas wrapped in expensive suits. The tone of the conversation was earnest, strategic, and decidedly more respectful than what Lennox had encountered all week. They discussed portfolio diversification, geopolitical risk, and emerging tech investments. Lennox listened carefully, contributed thoughtfully, and when he spoke, his words were met with nods, questions, and even smiles. It was the first time since arriving that he felt the tide turning. Back at the main conference center, whispers of Lennox's growing influence reached the ears of the event organizers. They began to adjust their approach, cautiously reintegrating him into sessions from which he had been excluded. Invitations arrived unmarked and signed, but impossible to ignore. His name resurfaced on attendee lists, his seating improved. Though still distant from the inner circle, he was no longer completely shut out. Some old skeptics remained, their cold stares reminders that acceptance was not yet universal, but the momentum was undeniable. As the days passed, Lennox's quiet ascent unsettled the established order. Private conversations slowed when he entered the room. His presence commanded attention, not through showmanship, but through expertise and unshakable calm. The carefully constructed narrative of invisibility was unraveling. Where once he had been mocked and ignored, now there was cautious acknowledgement. This was not the unnoticed visitor who had arrived just days earlier. This was a man who commanded silent attention, not through volume or spectacle, but through an unmistakable presence that seemed to fill every space he entered. The invitation that had arrived the night before was simple but unequivocal: a private meeting in the company's most secure boardroom, a space reserved only for the most influential figures in the industry. No introduction, no explanation, just a summons that demanded respect. When Lennox reached the polished oak doors of the boardroom, he paused for a fraction of a second, then entered with steady resolve. Inside, the room was already filled with an exclusive assembly, chairs occupied by the company's top executives, senior advisors, and key investors. The atmosphere was taut with expectation, the air thick with the subtle scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. Every eye in the room slowly turned toward Lennox as he closed the door behind him. There was no applause, no verbal greeting, only the quiet acknowledgement of power. The chair at the head of the table, reserved for the meeting's host, remained empty, as if signaling that Lennox's arrival was itself the event's opening act. Without a word, he walked to that seat, slid into the leather chair, and folded his hands on the table. The murmurs ceased. The tension shifted. The room was still, not in silence, but in focused attention. On the massive screen behind him, the company's logo gave way to a sleek presentation slide bearing his name, Lennox Cade, chairman of Cade Equity Holdings. Beneath his name, a list of titles and accolades scrolled briefly: billion-dollar deals, philanthropic ventures, industry awards. It was a stark contrast to the invisible man who had sat on a folding chair days before. This revelation was not new to everyone in the room. Some had already known or suspected, others were just learning. The impact was immediate. Eyes widened. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward with newfound interest. The moment crystallized a truth that had been whispered behind closed doors and erased in public view. Lennox Cade was not an outsider. He was a titan, a force to be reckoned with. The very foundation of exclusion they had built around him was now a fragile facade on the verge of collapse. Lennox's voice broke the silence with calm authority. He didn't need to explain his past or plead for recognition. The data spoke for itself. His team's projections, his fund's performance, his network's reach, all validated in crisp, unassailable figures that illuminated the presentation slides. As he detailed a forthcoming investment plan, his tone was measured but confident, weaving together strategic insight with the kind of industry knowledge that only comes from decades of experience. The boardroom listened. Questions followed, not challenging but seeking guidance. For the first time, Lennox was not an afterthought, but the focal point. When a senior partner asked for his opinion on a potential merger, the conversation shifted to his expertise, and his responses shaped the direction of the discussion. His input was decisive, respected, and final. Outside the boardroom, the ripple effects of the revelation began immediately. Staff who had ignored or dismissed Lennox found themselves navigating a new dynamic. Whispers of his identity circulated rapidly, some with awe, others with resentment. An assistant who had once handed him a bagged lunch now hurried to retrieve a more suitable meal. Security personnel who had barred his access opened doors without question. The entire organization was forced to recalibrate. Invitations were extended, privileges restored, and past slights quietly buried beneath a wave of corporate pragmatism. The irony was not lost on Lennox. The very same people who had tried to erase him now sought proximity, eager to align themselves with his growing influence. Yet he remained measured, refusing to indulge in retribution or bitterness. His focus was forward. That afternoon, a press release was quietly circulated to select media outlets, an announcement of a new strategic partnership between Cade Equity Holdings and Whiteststone Capital, valued at nearly $6 billion. It was a bold statement, a public declaration that not only reaffirmed Lennox's position, but reshaped the industry's perception of the firm itself. Reporters scrambled to verify details, industry analysts speculated on the implications, and social media buzzed with a sudden surge of interest in Lennox's story. His name trended briefly, not for scandal or controversy, but for the sheer magnitude of the deal and the dramatic arc of his rise from invisibility to prominence. Interviews were scheduled. Profiles were written. The narrative shifted from one of exclusion to one of triumph. Within the walls of Whitestone Capital, the atmosphere changed palpably. Meetings were now scheduled with Lennox at the center. Decisions were deferred to his counsel. Even those who had been most resistant were compelled to acknowledge his authority. The transformation was not instantaneous, nor was it universally welcomed, but it was undeniable. Within hours, the board convened an emergency session to assess the impact of the revelation, the $6 billion investment hanging like a beacon in the room. The company's legal and compliance teams sifted through internal communications, seeking evidence of discrimination, exclusion, and misconduct. Emails surfaced, some containing careless jokes and dismissive language directed at Lennox. The implications were severe. In the days that followed, key figures responsible for the hostile environment Lennox endured were called into private meetings with the Human Resources Department and legal counsel. The CFO, once amused by Lennox's supposed inconspicuousness, was the first to be confronted. His smirking dismissal of Lennox's presence was now a liability. After an intense review of his conduct and performance, he was asked to tender his resignation, effective immediately. News of the CFO's departure leaked quickly, sending ripples through the executive ranks. Other managers implicated in discriminatory behavior were placed on leave pending further investigation. The internal inquiry extended beyond personnel actions, prompting a comprehensive review of company culture, hiring practices, and diversity policies. External consultants were brought in to audit the firm's operations, with a focus on inclusivity and equitable treatment. Simultaneously, Whitestone Capital's stock price began to falter as investors reacted to the unfolding controversy. Shareholders demanded transparency and swift action to repair the firm's reputation. In response, the board issued a public statement acknowledging past shortcomings and outlining a strategic plan to foster a more inclusive workplace. Lennox's role in driving this change was highlighted, framing him not only as a savvy investor, but as a catalyst for corporate accountability. The press seized on the narrative, with headlines praising Lennox's resilience and calling for systemic reform across the finance sector. Social media platforms became forums for discussion, with thousands sharing stories of similar experiences and rallying behind Lennox's journey. The firm faced intense public pressure to demonstrate meaningful change, with activist investors and advocacy groups closely monitoring developments. Within the company, morale fluctuated. Employees previously complicit in exclusionary behavior faced difficult choices: adapt to the new culture or seek opportunities elsewhere. Training programs were rolled out, focusing on unconscious bias, cultural competency, and leadership accountability. Employee resource groups gained renewed support and visibility. Lennox himself was invited to lead workshops and share his perspective, his presence a living testament to the power of perseverance and integrity. Yet beneath the surface, resistance lingered. Some clung to old hierarchies, wary of the shifting tides. The struggle for cultural transformation was far from over, but the momentum was undeniable. On a more personal level, Lennox navigated the complex dynamics of his newfound authority with grace and strategic patience. He chose not to dwell on past injustices, but to focus on building bridges and empowering others. His dealings with former detractors were professional yet firm, signaling that the era of disregard was over. In boardrooms and industry forums, he became a sought-after voice on leadership and equity, shaping conversations and influencing policy. His story resonated widely, inspiring emerging leaders and challenging established norms. Despite the scrutiny and pressures, Lennox maintained his composure, grounded by the knowledge that his success was not just financial, but deeply transformative. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Lennox's revelation extended beyond Whitestone Capital. Other firms initiated their own reviews, fearing similar exposures. Regulatory bodies took note, increasing oversight on diversity and inclusion metrics within financial institutions. Industry conferences featured panels dedicated to systemic bias and corporate responsibility, often citing Lennox's experience as a case study. Educational institutions invited him to speak, integrating his story into curricula on ethics and leadership. The landscape of corporate finance began to change, shaped in part by the force of one man's journey from invisibility to influence. Back at Whitestone, a formal ceremony was held to honor the new era of inclusivity championed by Lennox and supported by the board. The firm unveiled a comprehensive diversity and equity initiative, funded by a significant portion of the investment Lennox had secured. The event was broadcast internally and externally, symbolizing a commitment to accountability and progress. Lennox spoke briefly, emphasizing the importance of recognizing talent and character beyond superficial markers. His words carried weight, not because of their grandeur, but because they embodied a lived truth. The ceremony marked a milestone, but also a beginning, a declaration that change was not only possible but necessary. Yet, even as the firm celebrated, Lennox remained mindful of the challenges ahead. The scars of exclusion were not erased overnight. The work of healing and rebuilding trust required ongoing effort. But the path forward was clearer, paved by the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and the resolve to forge a better future. Months after the seismic upheaval that revealed Lennox Cade's power and forced Whitestone Capital to confront its culture of exclusion, the firm, and the industry as a whole, found itself irrevocably changed. The initial shock waves of accountability had given way to sustained transformation efforts, with the ripple effect extending beyond boardrooms and stock markets into the very ethos that governed corporate conduct. Lennox, now firmly established as both a visionary investor and a champion of equity, knew the true battle had only just begun. The visible victories, the resignations, the policy reforms, the public declarations were necessary but not sufficient. For justice to be real and lasting, it had to be etched deeply into the fabric of the institution, encoded in daily practices and ingrained attitudes. It was a challenge he faced with determination and humility. Early in the new year, Whitestone Capital unveiled the Cade Forum, a dedicated space within its headquarters that symbolized this new chapter. The forum was not just a conference room or an event space. It was designed as a living memorial and a proactive center for inclusion, education, and dialogue. The lobby walls bore photographs and stories of trailblazers and changemakers from diverse backgrounds. Interactive displays invited employees and visitors alike to explore the history of systemic bias in finance and beyond. The forum hosted workshops, lectures, and panels featuring leaders committed to equity and justice. It was a constant reminder that the past could not be forgotten, nor the lessons ignored. The building's name, a bold and deliberate act, ensured that Lennox's journey and what it represented would remain visible to all who walked those halls. Lennox himself took a quiet pride in the forum's opening ceremony. He did not seek the spotlight, preferring instead to watch from the side as colleagues, allies, and emerging leaders spoke passionately about their experiences and visions for a more just industry. When his turn came, his words were measured, carrying the weight of one who had seen both the darkest silences and the brightest possibilities. He spoke of dignity, respect, and the imperative of seeing every individual as more than their appearance or background. His message was clear. True progress required courage, not just in moments of crisis, but in every decision, every interaction, every day. The applause that followed was heartfelt and sustained, not for him personally, but for the ideals he embodied. Outside the walls of Whitestone Capital, Lennox's story became part of a broader movement. Corporate leaders across sectors referenced his experience as a catalyst for introspection and change. Universities incorporated his journey into leadership curricula, highlighting the intersection of ethics and business. Nonprofits partnered with him to mentor underrepresented talent, fostering pathways that had long been blocked. Media profiles depicted not only his financial acumen, but his resilience and commitment to justice. Social conversations about race, power, and opportunity gained new momentum, informed by the tangible example of someone who had transformed adversity into agency. Lennox's influence was no longer confined to balance sheets or shareholder meetings. It was woven into the cultural dialogue of an era. Yet, amidst the acclaim and progress, Lennox remained grounded in the reality that justice is never a destination, but a continuous pursuit. He met regularly with emerging leaders, listening as much as he advised, understanding that the path forward was collective and evolving. He championed transparency, accountability, and humility, warning against complacency and the illusion of quick fixes. He advocated for systemic change that embraced complexity and acknowledged historical wounds without allowing them to define the future. For Lennox, the meaning of justice was inseparable from empathy and sustained action. It was not a trophy to be won, but a legacy to be nurtured. As the first anniversary of his public reveal approached, Lennox reflected on the journey, not just his own, but that of everyone touched by it. From the first day when he sat alone, ignored and undermined, to this moment where his name symbolized hope and transformation, the arc had been profound. The scars of exclusion had not vanished, but they had been reclaimed as sources of strength. The story of invisibility turned visibility served as a beacon for those who had been marginalized and a cautionary tale for those who had wielded power carelessly. It reminded the world that dignity cannot be stripped away without consequence, and that justice, when embraced, has the power to reshape entire institutions. In the quiet moments of reflection, Lennox understood that his victory was not simply his own, but belonged to all who had been silenced or sidelined. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, the refusal to be diminished, the courage to confront injustice, and the vision to build a more equitable future. The legacy he sought to leave was not only in billions of dollars invested or deals secured, but in a culture transformed, a system awakened, and a community empowered. His story was proof that change begins when one person refuses to be invisible and when others choose to listen and act. That was the meaning that burned into memory. That was the justice that would endure. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of this journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Lennox Cade's story resonated with you the most? Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and join the conversation. Your support means a lot and helps bring more stories like this to life.